Episode 1. A Great Problem Goes West. The London and North Eastern Railway was one of the so-called Big Four companies, formed during the 1923 Grouping Act in Britain. In this form, with engines from the North Eastern region and Great Northern Railways, it lasted a mere 25 years, but left an everlasting impression of luxury, prestige and speed. 40 years after the end of British mainline steam, these are the stories they tell. This is Alan. He is a large Blue Express engine, namely an A1 Pacific. Alan lives at a big yard with many other engines, of both his class and others. He is a long, well-built engine with a lip chimney, large driving wheels and a good sense of humour. Alan is normally found pulling fast passenger trains, but sometimes pulls goods trains to the north of the border. He is normally found in the company of a delightful old engine named Stephen, after his designer. Stephen is much older than Alan, and wiser too. He pulls local goods trains and stopping passenger trains, and he doesn't mind going more slowly than the other engines. He is one of the few engines that still wears the apple green of the London and North Eastern Railway, and is proud of it, despite the paint being worn here and there. These two engines have another shedmate, a haughty A4 Pacific named Sir Ralph. Sir Ralph is proud of his heritage, related to the famous Gresley A3s and a member of an elegant class of streamliners. His attitude sometimes annoys the other engines, and Alan is quick to put him in his place. But he does have a big heart, somewhere in his smoke box. This story concerns a fourth engine, not from this region. No, this engine was a visitor from the western region, taking on the duties of another engine, who had failed somewhere near London. This engine was very old, and clanked noisily along the line. His tubes were leaking, his cylinders wheezing, yet time after time he found puff to keep going. For a whole week the old engine found himself pulling goods trains from the south to the north, and would get very tired upon reaching the yard of Alan, Stephen and Sir Ralph. One day Stephen was simmering in the yard. It had been a long day. Shunting coaches for the haughty Sir Ralph was no mean feat, and neither was preparing goods trains for the other engines. The foreman knew how hard Stephen had been working, and had given him a rest. Stephen sighed. "It's good to have some time to let your wheels rest," he said, to nobody in particular. Just at that moment an astronomical racket came from the junction. There was the western engine, wheezing into the yard, with a long line of coal trucks. "Goodness," Stephen said, as the engine rattled past. "He's older than me," he said with wonderment, as the old engine kept going. There was little steam in the air, and no wonder, for the poor engine had none left to give. Wheezing badly, the engine finally stopped under the signal, on the goods line, and moved no more. Stephen was concerned. "He'll never make it back home," he said, and went to find Alan in the shed. "I only ask, Alan," Stephen said, "because I'm not as sprightly as I used to be myself, and you've just been repaired, so you'll want a nice run anyway." Alan laughed. "Well, if you can get the foreman to agree," he said, "I'll do it." "Thank you," Stephen said, relieved. "You know, we are all one railway now. I'm sure the old engine's friends back west—" "Back west? Are you to say you'll be helping a western engine?" Sir Ralph had appeared from the shed, hissing loudly. "Why, yes, Sir Ralph," said Alan, "unless, of course, you'd like to do the honours." Sir Ralph started. "Honour? My good fellow," he sniffed, "it is not a question of honour, but a matter of decency." "Oh? And how do you figure that?" asked Stephen innocently. "Stephen, my good engine, we are Eastern region engines. It has always been like this. Why, in the days of the London North Eastern Railway, we raced the engines of the Great Western quite frequently. We were always striving to be the best, and of course we were." Alan laughed. "The best? Maybe the clumsiest," he said. "Who managed to break all of the fine china on his train last week?" Sir Ralph puffed angrily. "That," he said, "was not my fault. If signals change at a whim while you are at speed—" "Ah, yes, and you know all about that," said Alan, winking at Stephen. "Well, of course. I am one of the fastest, if not the fastest engine in the world," Sir Ralph said grandly. "Oh, good. Then you could get our Western friend here home, safely and quickly too." "Heavens, no," said Sir Ralph indignantly. "I have my own trains to pull on the morrow, thank you. I'm going back into the shed for some oil, coal, and a good nap before my evening run." And with that, he disappeared back into the shed. Alan could only laugh. "Puffed up in the smoke box he is, and no mistake," he said. "So, Stephen, where would I have to take him to?" "Well, only as far as London. There'll be another engine waiting there to take him back to his shed. Old Oak Common, I think it says on his brake van," Stephen said. "Well, that'll be a good long run to stretch my wheels. Do you like my new chimney? They fitted it after this overhaul." But before Stephen could reply, the shed foreman had shouted out something to Alan's driver. "Ah, there's your answer, Stephen," Alan said, letting off some steam. "I'll see you this evening when I get back." And with that, Alan puffed out of the shed, across the points, and towards the junction, where the old engine lay waiting for him. Alan backed down onto the train. "Right, don't worry, old-timer," Alan chortled. "Hold on tight and keep your wheels free, and we'll have you home in no time." "Thank you," the old engine wheezed. "I thought they were going to cut me up here and then." "Nah," Alan said. "You would have ruined the look of our junction, and besides, you're not in that bad nick. You should see some of our tank engines, always coated in dirt and rust." The signal arm lifted skywards, and Alan's driver applied his regulator. "We're off! Come along!" Alan called back to the coal trucks, which muttered amongst themselves. Starting slowly, but getting faster and faster, they pulled out of the junction and onto the main line. Soon they'd been switched to a branch line to allow faster traffic to pass them, and were making good time. Alan snorted in front, keeping the train moving. He felt slightly out of breath, but that was due to being stiff from the overhaul, and not the weight of the train. They reached another station, where a worried-looking V2 engine stood, waiting. "Boop boop," whistled Alan as they sped past, and the V2 watched and replied with a feeble beep. Suddenly there was a crack, and the Western engine, dazed and confused, found himself derailed on a level crossing, and there was Alan, puffing further and further away. "Wait!" the Western engine called. "What about me?" Alan suddenly found that the weight of the train was lifted. He thought. The old puffer was more steam than he was letting on, and so gradually got faster and faster as he steamed through the English countryside. Back at the level crossing, a permanent way gang had seen the derailment, and were helping to put the Western engine back on the rails. Luckily, only his two little wheels at the front had come off, so they had little trouble. But they had to contend with the angry cries of the road users. One red bus, called Worcester, a blue butcher's van, and a green grocer's van, with their old drivers. "During the war," the butcher said to the bus driver, "I had to help the Home Guards stop a runaway train. It was going to hit the King's train. Oh, and the vicar, verger, and ARPP person was on a handcart, following us with a brake. So I says to Captain Mannering, I says..." Meanwhile, Alan had seen a distant signal at danger, and began to slow down. "Bother," he said, "and we were going so well." He stopped under the signal, and was surprised to see the signalman approach them. "Hello," he said. "Hello yourself," the signalman said suddenly. "I haven't had any word on light engine moves." "We're not light engine," Alan said, smirking. "Where's your train, then?" the signalman asked. Alan had a sudden feeling that he was going to the scrap heap. He grinned nervously. "Behind us?" The signalman merely stared at the blue engine. "Invisible, is it?" Alan, still smiling, remembered with a sinking feeling the moment where it had got all too easy a few miles back. "Right, I've stopped traffic," the signalman said shortly. "You'd better go back and find your train." "Yes, sir," Alan said, and quickly backed away. At the crossing, the old butcher soldier was still nattering, but was finally drowned out in a chorus of cheers as Alan, sheepishly, backed into view. "Right, well," he began, but the Western engine just laughed. "Well, I did try to hold on tight, but my wheels weren't quite so free." This made Alan feel much better. "Right," he said, "we'll get you home as quickly, but as safely as possible," he added, remembering his taunting of Sir Ralph earlier. He was coupled to the Western engine, and with a deafening blast from his cylinders, they were off and away from the crossing. Alan returned home early the next morning. It was still dark, and he was surprised to see Stephen waiting for him, and still shimmering. "You needn't have waited all night for me," Alan laughed. "I didn't. Sir Ralph was keeping us all up last night with his lecture on why Western engines are evil," Stephen retorted. "I'm sticking my funnel out here to try and get some rest." "Oh well, you can try now," yawned Alan. "I've had enough for a few hours." "Was our Western friend any hassle?" Stephen asked. Alan smiled. No hassle at all," he said, thinking of the engine's kind words.